نحمده ونصلي ونسلم على سيدنا ونبينا وحبيبنا وشفيعنا ومولانا محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم رسوله النبي الأمين المكين الحنين الكريم الرؤوف الرحيم. أما بعد فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قال الله تعالى في شأن حبيبه: إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما. اللهم صل وسلم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا محمد كما تحب وترضى بأن تصلي عليه. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. واتقوا فتنة لا تصيبن الذين ظلموا منكم خاصة واعلموا أن الله شديد العقاب. صدق الله العظيم وبلغنا رسوله النبي الكريم ونحن على ذلك لمن الشاهدين والشاكرين والحمد لله رب العالمين. Most respected ulama, my respected elders, brothers and sisters in Islam, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. Today's discourse deals with a critical question as to how much are we prepared for calamities and catastrophes, and what from a Quranic and prophetic perspective are calamities and catastrophes that every single one of us ought to be preparing for on a daily basis. This is what we will be discussing, inshallah ta'ala. It will be a short discussion because of the nikah, inshallah ta'ala. Every country has a disaster management team in place that deal with catastrophes of floods, earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, or some calamity that may take place. It could be something of a natural disaster, it could be something by virtue of buildings falling down, or some disaster wrought by our own hands, and so many other disasters like the nuclear disaster in Japan, etc., etc., etc. But there are always emergency responses and emergency funds available and emergency teams in place to deal with these catastrophes, with these calamities, and people engage and countries engage in disaster management. This is something which is common to all countries, and for people to protect themselves and to protect citizens with regards to the difficulties and obstacles and challenges that people may face on a daily basis. But the Holy Prophet Muhammadur Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam did not confine calamities and catastrophes purely to natural disasters. He did not confine it purely to something that happens by accident or something that is wreaked and wrought by our own hands, by virtue of war, by virtue of invasions, or whatever the situation may be. And when people engage in this type of activity, there has to be a process of rebuilding the nation, rebuilding the communities, rebuilding homes, rebuilding infrastructure, and whatever it is. These may be earthly disasters and catastrophes and calamities, but the Holy Prophet Muhammadur Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam prepared the Muslim ummah and advised the Muslim ummah to prepare for a greater calamity. A calamity which is not necessarily physical, but a calamity which is, one, spiritual, secondly, civilizational, and it affects communities. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, indicating and exhorting us in the Holy Quran in Surah Al-Anfal, has stated, وَاتَّقُوا, beware, فِتْنَةً لَا تُصِيبَنَّ الَّذِينَ ظَلَمُوا مِنْكُمْ خَاصَّةً. Beware of that scourge, beware of those calamities, beware of those tribulations, which will not only affect the wrongdoers amongst you. Now Allah is clarifying a matter, that people's actions and the consequences of evil and the consequences of the actions of wrongdoers has a ripple effect on everybody in the community, as obviously the consequences of good actions also have a ripple effect on the community. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling you, don't think that if you are engaging in good, and if you are engaging in living your life to the best of your ability, that the effects of the greater community out there is not going to affect you in one way only or the other. I'll get back to that from a behavioral perspective and what behavioral geneticists have to say about that at a later stage, inshallah ta'ala, if I remember. Okay? But what did Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam caution about? Allah is telling you, beware of those trials and tribulations and those scourges which will affect the good as well as the evil doers. And Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam expanding on that, in a hadith in Tirmizi Sharif, Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam stated, he said, Badiru bil a'mali sab'an hal tanzurun. He said, race to do good works against 7. Meaning, the focus and the goal of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was that his ummah must maximize the opportunities that they have to do good before they are confronted with certain calamities, certain obstacles, certain trials, tribulations, and catastrophes. And what are these 7? He said, "Badiru bil amali sab'an hal tanzuruna illa faqran munsiya." He said, are you waiting? What are you waiting for? Race to do good deeds before these calamities hit you, before these catastrophes hit you. And what is the first catastrophe which Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam spoke about? He said, "Faqran munsiya." He said, what is it? Overwhelming poverty. Overwhelming poverty. It's a financial calamity. It's a financial catastrophe. Overwhelming poverty. Secondly, the Holy Prophet ﷺ said, what's the second catastrophe? He said, "Oh, ghinan mutghiya." One, he spoke about overwhelming poverty. The second catastrophe Rasulullah is speaking about here, he said, "Oh, ghinan mutghiya." And what is that? Oh, distracting wealth, richness. So excessive wealth, right, which distracts people from the true realities of life, which makes people oblivious to the suffering and pain of other people, is a spiritual calamity and catastrophe for the ummah, as is overwhelming abject poverty. These are two major calamities and catastrophes and trials and tribulations for the world. And it becomes an obstacle in us being able to effectively function as an ummah, as well as individuals. So Rasulullah is telling you on an individual level and on a communal level, on a community level, locally, globally, individually, collectively, prepare for these disasters and try and stay away from them. One is overwhelming poverty, or ghinan mutghiya, or distracting richness. The third one Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam spoke about, or debilitating illness, or maradan mufsida, or debilitating illness. Really, you and I don't know when we will be afflicted by some type of natural or physical problem, a health problem that will debilitate you to such a level that you can't function effectively, either in society or an individual level where you can't even take care of yourself anymore, let alone do good deeds. You can't engage in any of this anymore, because why? Your health has been so affected that it has debilitated you. That's the third spiritual calamity or catastrophe that you've got to be preparing for. Then Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "Oh, haraman mufannida." What did he speak about? He said the catastrophe and the calamity, which is also a physical one, which is what? He said babbling senility. Babbling senility. When you reach a certain age, when you know what, literally you are suffering from Alzheimer's, or you develop bipolar disorder, or you undergo one of these mental issues, depression, or whatever the situation may be, and you end up in a condition where you can't function effectively on a mental level. He spoke about debilitating illness on a physical level, as well as debilitating illness with regards to mental health, wherein your mental equilibrium is affected. Then Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "Oh, haraman mufattida, oh mautan mujhiza." Then he spoke about a natural calamity, sudden death. Sudden death. You hear it all the time. This is something which is a natural calamity, catastrophe. It can affect anybody at any given time. It's a sudden death. Well, not sudden death, playoff now. That will come in a World Cup. Okay? This is a sudden death. People can drop dead at any given time. Grandfathers are alive. Okay? Grandchildren die. Right? Age is no distinction for Malak al-Maut. He is not interested. You can be in the prime of your youth, or you can be in decrepitude. Malak al-Maut comes for you. But the sudden death is the one which is the greatest shocker, because all of a sudden you woke up one morning, not even preparing, not even having thought about the fact that, you know what, have I prepared enough for my future life? And already by the afternoon you've been buried. He said, prepare for that calamity, because it is a reality that you've got to face, and every one of us has to face. Then the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, then he spoke of a global calamity, right? And of a global and a civilizational calamity, which I spoke about. And that is, he spoke about a change in the world order. and the change in the world order has been symbolized and exemplified by the coming of the false Messiah, the Antichrist, Masih al-Dajjal. So he said, are you prepared for that sudden death? O awid Dajjal, فَشَرٌ غَائِبٍ يُنْتَظَرُ. He said, are you prepared for a complete change in the world order as you know it? Right? Wherein there will be an advent of a godless society, right? A society which is preoccupied with production and consumption. We already, it's the dawn of that age already, and the era of the Antichrist. But the Prophet ﷺ spoke about a civilizational catastrophe and calamity. He said, you've got to be prepared for this. You can't be caught up in that, because your iman is at stake. Your life is at stake. Society's history and destiny is at stake. Awid Dajjal. Then the Holy Prophet ﷺ spoke about the last one. And he said, Awissa'a fasa'atu adha wa amar. And he said the final calamity will be a supernatural calamity, which is the day of Qiyamah. So look how Rasulullah ﷺ spoke about disaster management and preparing for calamities and catastrophes, and how and what he classified to be calamities and catastrophes. I want to focus on the first two in particular without giving too much of emphasis on the rest, simply because we don't have the time. And thirdly, the rest of the three are basically self-explanatory. The new world order with Dajjal has been mentioned in detail, and we know about the Qiyamah. But the first two are interesting. Rasulullah ﷺ spoke about, he said, those two calamities which every one of us must be prepared for. The first thing, he said, فَقْرًا مُنْسِيًا. He said that poverty which is overwhelming, which is abject, which makes you forget about everything else, because you're only there to ensure that you survive. It's all about your survival now. You'll think, but what's so bad about that? Everyone should be prepared for that. What is Rasulullah telling you? He's telling you, we have an outlook. The Islamic worldview is such that we don't voluntarily incline towards poverty, especially abject, overwhelming poverty. We need to be active individuals working towards ensuring some degree of financial stability, because in Islam and from the Quranic perspective, financial stability is one of the primary requirements for us to fulfill two of the foundational pillars of Islam, Zakah and Hajj. If you don't have money or beyond your nisab, you can't pay Zakah. And if you don't have financial stability and sustained financial stability, you can't fulfill a second pillar of Islam, which is Hajj. So Rasulullah is telling you that this otherworldly view of asceticism and so on there has its place and has to be presented within a correct perspective. But the reality of the matter is that every Muslim should be working towards some degree of financial stability, unless and until before he reaches the stage where that poverty overwhelms him. Now this is where it becomes scary. And Rasulullah ﷺ then stated this immediately after that. He stated that the second calamity that you must be aware of and you must beware of is O ghinan mutghiya. He said, O richness or wealth which is distracting, which makes you oblivious to the realities of life around you. And I want to discuss this in detail. 85 people in the world. How many is that? 1/3 of this masjid or less. They can fit in 1/3 of this mosque or less. 85 people in the world earn and are wealthier and have more wealth than 3.5 billion people on planet Earth. 85 versus 3.5 billion people on planet Earth. 1%, that's 1% of the world's population. Okay? 1% of the world's population owns half of the world's wealth. 1% of the world's population. 1% of the world's population has half of the world's wealth. And out of that 1%, 85 people of that 1% are worth more and have more wealth than 3.5 billion people on planet Earth. Rasulullah, when he spoke, he knew exactly what he was saying. Distracting richness, distracting wealth, where there is such polarization, where there is such a major schism between the rich and the poor, and there's such an imbalance in the economies of the world that 85 people have more money and more wealth than 3.5 billion people on planet Earth. What is this? What is this? And we wonder why we find ourselves in such calamitous times, in such catastrophic times. And what is it all about? It's about the need for greed. It's the need for greed. You can toss these numbers about as much as you want to, but that's the reality. And this is Forbes magazine, this year's Forbes magazine. They spoke about the disparities of wealth in the countries. And in some of the countries, the reality of the matter is that the rich become richer and the poor become poorer. But the problem is that with the 85 people in the world who own more than 3.5 billion of the world, is that rich 1% of the world who own half of the world's wealth, spiritually speaking, emotionally speaking, psychologically speaking, mentally speaking, are in fact no better than the poor. Because Rasulullah, when he spoke about distracting poverty, right? If you look at some of the research that has been done in recent years about the effects of poverty on the behavior of children and adults, and the societies that poverty breeds, right? The one important factor that environmental geneticists have spoken about is that your genes play something between 30 to 50% and influence 30 to 50% of your behavior. And the rest of it, between 70 to 50% of your behavior and your life, is dictated to by the environment. So as great as your genes may be, if you find yourself in an environment which is not conducive to optimum development, optimum human development, right? That society cannot thrive. It cannot. It can never be a successful society on all levels. And success cannot, from an Islamic perspective, be measured purely by the amount of money you have and by virtue of the wealth that you possess. Because those 85 people in the world who are worth more than 3.5 billion of the world there are no better. And I'll give you an example of this. The 1% of this population of planet Earth that owns half of the world's wealth, in a survey conducted by BMC Medicine, right, it's a British concern, in an international survey of 90,000 people, they came up with overwhelming evidence that the richer you are, the sadder you are. There is a direct correlation between mental illness and wealth. Don't say I didn't tell you that all rich people are crazy. Right? 90,000 people. The only way that they can stay happy is by popping happy pills. Right? And the only people who get rich are the psychiatrists. That's the reality. Right? And what is the disease that they suffer from? There was a phrase which was coined, which is called affluenza. And some of the biggest victims to this illness in this modern day and age are the youth, the teenagers. You may have been following some of those articles there about some of the youth in America particularly, who, because they come from wealthy homes, because they come from so-called stable backgrounds, right, they are allowed to literally get away with murder. Right? They get a light sentence, right, or whatever it is there, to keep them out of jail, simply because of the socio-economic status. And what did they plead it as a case. He's got a case of affluenza, Your Honor. He doesn't know how to deal with his money. Really. They present it as a mitigating factor in a recent court case in America. That's what Rasulullah was speaking about. Right? And when you look on the other side of the coin, as I said, the true development of a community is not possible if there is such debilitating poverty as Rasulullah spoke about. When we look at these third world countries, well, we are, not third world, but second world country. Right? But if you look at the disparities within our own locality, right? And the small townships that are around our area. Look at those people because of the socio-economic circumstances that don't live a comfortable life the way you and I possibly are doing, inshallah ta'ala. And you will see the differences. It has a difference on cognitive function. Those children who live in poverty-stricken societies and those adults who have become part and parcel of these poverty-stricken neighborhoods and communities and whatever it is there, right? They have problems with regards to cognitive function. They have problems with regards to integration into community. They have problems with what they call chronic abuse and acute abuse. Verbal, physical abuse, mental abuse. And the reality of the matter is, as much as we may try to sweep it under the carpet, and we may think that this disparity between rich and poor, and the wealthy and the haves and the have-nots is not something which is our concern as long as we are doing it there. It's something we need to realize that it affects us as a greater community. And then Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam spoke about something else. And he spoke about the reality of our lives. We are so preoccupied with the race for acquiring as much as we can, right? Eventually it must take its toll out somewhere. And one place down the line, what do you end up normally having? Either a heart attack, or you end up with cancer, or some other illness and disease, and you're not prepared for it. And thereafter, the harsh reality of real life on planet Earth hits you when it's too late. Where are we going to? These are some of the examples, because I need to cut it short because of the nikah. But these are realities that we need to work towards. Right? The Holy Prophet ﷺ spoke about calamities on a financial level, right? With regards to poverty, extreme poverty, and extreme wealth. I mean, if you look at some of these especially in extreme wealth, if you look at some of these documentaries that are shown now on our satellite TVs, and the lifestyle that the rich and shameless engage in, right? It's crazy. Distracting richness. They're so preoccupied with their wealth, they literally don't know what to do with it. And on the other scale, when you look at the debilitating poverty, have you been to any of the slums in India? Have you seen what those slums look like? Have you seen the lives that people live in those places? It's not even habitable for wild animals. Can we, as a community, can we as the ummah of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam ignore these things? Because what happens, unfortunately, is that we feel that because we are Muslim and because we have the deen and all of that, we seem to just create a bubble around ourselves. That's all we do. Right? Be happy. If you can't pop a real pill, we're popping one of those, placebos. When we delude ourselves into feeling that we are happy. But you can't find that peace. You can't find the degree of security. And Islam and your duty towards Allah and the community will not allow you to be able to sleep in comfort if your neighbor goes hungry. That is the disaster management that we need to be working toward all the time. And if we don't, and if we ignore it, when it comes knocking at our door or smashes through our door, we can't deal with it. Because we have no disaster management put in place. Okay, I'm going to stop my talk right now. You've got the basic idea. Prepare for these things, because it can affect any one of us on an individual level and on a collective level. And one thing I'd like to bring to the attention of many people is that in this economic downturn, no matter how much the growth of Islamic banks may have improved since 2008, the reality of the matter is the economic downturn has had its ripple effects throughout the world, and everyone has felt the tremors of the disasters in America and Europe and so on there, right? With the bond scandals and whatever it is, and it has trickled down. And we are seeing now regularly, and it's something which is now, which has literally become a norm, wherein people who were living literally comfortable lives, right, are now literally below the average bread line. And that is something that the community needs to wake up to. People who are earning, who are doing well, who are adventurous, who are entrepreneurial in their spirit and whatever it is there, because of socio-economic conditions, find themselves in major financial stress and difficulty. And this is where I'm urging our community also not to focus solely on those people who are fuqara, the poorest of the poor that we know, who literally It's not a good thing, but the reality of the matter is they survive on handouts. We have another class and category of people, which is an emerging category of people that are now in our community, who had jobs before, who were working, who were able-bodied, who have the potential, but just don't have the work anymore. And we need to work towards effectively resolving these problems until or before it becomes such an issue that it reaches crisis level. We have a tendency, we only deal with it when it's a crisis. And that too, we just put a band-aid over it, right, and hope for the best after that. This is not the way to deal with it. And Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam stated, he said, our preparation for all of these things must be a continuous one. And this is what we need to work towards. Allah give us tawfiq and hidayah, inshallah ta'ala, wa ma alayna illa balagh. I have two announcements. One announcement was that Brother Muhammad Imali has